We think about things a bit differently, maybe because it's my second company, but we are fully bootstrapped. We think profit first in everything we do. We are only a team of 3, and we've been able to grow the revenue to 4.5 million ARR with product growth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, a podcast that brings to light the incredible stories of those who left the familiarity of home for new horizons. I'm your host, Prateek Panda, always curious and eager to share these journeys of courage and determination. Today, we are delighted to have Esben join our podcast, a perfect example of values and the spirit that we cherish. His remarkable story is one of venturing beyond his familiar boundaries, seizing the adventures and possibilities that arise from journeying into unknown territories. He moved from Denmark to San Francisco in more than just a change of location. And he's not only established 2 successful SaaS startups, but has also overcome many industry challenges. We're going to talk a little bit about his journey with UserFlow as well as Cobalt and his time and the impact in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Esben, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with a little bit about your background. You grew up in Denmark. What was the ecosystem like over there for you? What was your background? And what encouraged you to move to Silicon Valley?
So yeah, I grew up in Denmark. I always played with computers like many kids at my age and coded like simple websites when I was like 16. But then I started to study engineer. So I went to the Technical University of Denmark and studied engineering. And back then, so this was, when did I graduate? 2010. It wasn't like a viable career path to actually do startups. There wasn't a lot of people doing that, and it wasn't really anything that people talked about. If you were an ambitious engineering student or any type of student, you would typically apply for consultancies where you could get to travel the world and get a lot of challenge. And that's exactly what I did. So I applied for Accenture, got a job there and worked on a big project for them and also got to travel and so on. But I always had this kind of itch to do something else. I felt like in the consulting world, we were helping one like old school enterprise customer fix a certain area, like optimize for them. And it wasn't like making a huge impact, even though it was a very fun and challenging work environment. I didn't feel like I was having as much impact as you potentially could. And that's why I was looking for something different. So back when I started in Accenture, so 2010, 13 years ago, there wasn't really a big startup ecosystem in Denmark. But then around 2012, 2013, something started to happen. I don't know why. Maybe it was because of the 4-day work week, or was it called 4-hour work week book. I think that changed a lot actually for a lot of people. And people started to think more about building startups and so on. That changed something in Denmark as well, and startup started to be on the agenda a bit more. And I started reading books about doing startups and so on. And luckily, I then had a colleague in Accenture who had the kind of same ambitions and dreams. And we then decided that we wanted to do a startup together. And that's where we left Accenture back in 2013 to do Cobalt together with my colleague's brother and one of his friends. So yeah, that was like the early phase. Basically studied engineering, went into consultancy, and then when the startup community started to be a bit stronger in Denmark, I decided to do something in the space.
Okay, great. You told a little bit about what it was like about 13 years ago in Denmark, and the startup ecosystem wasn't that developed back then. What do you think is the situation today? Do you think there is a much more supportive and vibrant ecosystem now?
Yeah, for sure. I think today, pretty much everywhere in the world, the startup brand has expanded. So now it's a completely viable career path to go out and do a startup after your studies and so on. It's really become a thing around the world. And especially in Denmark, it's become much more popular. I still think we could have more startups, but it's definitely becoming more
Of
popular
course.
and becoming a thing in universities that students do startups even while they're studying and so on, which was maybe 1 or 2 that 10 years or 13 years ago, but it wasn't a lot of people doing it. So I think that has definitely changed. And if I was to start a startup today, I would, and didn't live in the US as I do now, I would probably just start it from Denmark and not go to Silicon Valley as we ended up doing with Cobalt.
That would have been my next question. If you were to start now, would you consider moving to the Valley? Do you think that you would still at some point want to move to the Valley, or do you think we are now at a point where it isn't really necessary to be physically based in Silicon Valley?
I think today you don't necessarily need to be based in Silicon Valley. You can still get a lot of inspiration from being there and network and connections. So it's still good to go there. But I think you can start a startup from anywhere. Maybe to give a bit more insights on that second phase of our story. So when we decided to start Cobalt, that was 2013. I think we wanted two things. One, we wanted to build a company, and two, we also wanted some kind of adventure, right? And in the beginning, it was very much just like a project kind of thing. We said, okay, let's go build a company. Let's try to build something in 3 months. The goal was to build an MVP and then get 1 or 3 customers. And actually, we had decided to do the startup before we had the idea for what we wanted to do, which is a bit other way around. But we decided to do this platform that basically allowed anybody to invite friendly hackers to come and find vulnerabilities in your website. And we had seen that from Google and Facebook were doing these kind of invite programs or where they invited friendly hackers. And we thought that any business should be doing that. So that's the idea we had in mind. And that's what we set out to do. So initially, we actually moved to Buenos Aires in Argentina, which was a bit atypical, but that was because my colleague had moved there, lived there for 1 year. And it was a good place to start out, live for a cheaper rent and so on. And we built the MVP from there. So that was part of the adventure to go somewhere else and be completely isolated from the world. And then when we had finalized the MVP and seen that we could get a couple of customers, we said, okay, what now, right? What do we do? And then we actually considered going back to Denmark, raise capital there, go to an accelerator program in Denmark. But all the programs that we talked to and the investors in Denmark, they were giving really bad terms. So this was 10 years ago, right? They wanted way too much of a share of your company for way too little money. And when we then looked at the US instead, where we could apply for similar accelerator programs and speak to investors there, they were giving much better terms. So 10 years ago, the terms in Silicon Valley was just much better if you wanted to raise capital as a startup. So that's what we decided to do. We basically got into an accelerator called Boost in San Mateo in Silicon Valley. And we went to the US, got in, was part of that 3 month accelerator program, ended up raising $1 million. And then we stayed around in Silicon Valley. So one thing I definitely think have changed since 10 years ago is the investment environment is much better in Europe today. You get much better terms. It's much more competitive with the US. So if you want to build an investor-backed business, then you can get similar terms in Europe now as you can in the US, which was not possible 10 years ago. And that's why we decided to go to the Valley back then and not stay in Europe.
I can relate a lot with your journey. And by the way, I've been following the Cobalt journey for a fair amount of time, because right around the same time, 2014 is when I had started a security company called AppKnox with two of my co-founders. And we were in the mobile app penetration testing space, automated tests and stuff like that. And back then, bug bounty programs were starting to get popular. And I believe you would consider BugCrowd to be one of your competitors, maybe. So that space was evolving. And we had a similar journey where we moved out of India, moved to Singapore, which had at that point slightly better terms and raising money, as well as a better access to the market that we were looking after. And went through that journey, eventually came back to India, then started our path towards Silicon Valley. And I can totally relate to how things were different about 12 to 15 years ago and how much the ecosystem has changed. Today, even in India, you could get very favorable terms or very competitive terms if you're an enterprise SaaS company, very much in line to what Silicon Valley investors have to offer. But tell me this: once your market was still pretty much North America, that's where most of your customers were. At what point did you start thinking of actually building a team in North America as well?
So from day one, we actually became an American company, you can say, because we decided to raise our money there and build the team there. So from day one, we were focused on building a team in the US. but our customers were all over actually from day one as well. We were not thinking like US is the only market. We were thinking global from day one. And I think if you can do that, then you should do that. Like I always been building, both my businesses are selling to other software companies, and software companies are all around the world, and it doesn't matter as long as they speak English, you can sell to them, right? So you shouldn't narrow yourself to a specific geographical area. So we didn't do that with Cobalt. We haven't done that with UserFlow. We've been selling globally from day one. But of course, the US market is much more homogeneous. They all speak English. They typically want to spend more on software. So it's a great market to be in. So market-wise, we always thought global, but team-wise, we were in Silicon Valley. We later moved up to San Francisco, and then we just built our company there. So the initial team we built out in Cobalt was in San Francisco. Later on, we actually expanded into Berlin because we found out that retaining talent in the US, in San Francisco at least, was a bit hard, especially engineering talent. It was both very expensive and hard to retain. So we decided, let's not do that. Let's use our unfair advantage of knowing Europe. Let's go to Berlin and let's open an office there so we can hire engineering talent in Europe. And then over time, the presence in San Francisco actually declined more and more. We opened up an office in Boston, where there was also a lot of great security go-to-market talent due to successful companies like Veracode and Rapid7. They had built a strong ecosystem. In that way, we actually, you can say the first 4 years, 4 to 5 years, we were in San Francisco, but over time, the presence there declined. And then actually during COVID, we became a remote first company and with the main presence in Boston and Berlin rather than San Francisco.
That makes sense. And for all the people who are watching this and listening, there are a lot of founders who are in different parts of the world looking at moving or growing their teams in the US. You suggested some key points there, which people might have picked up from. But like, for example, you wanted to hire better security GTM talent, and pockets like Boston were exciting because other established players like Veracode and Rapid7 established a good sort of ecosystem there. Do you have any other tips and advice for people who are in that early stage, want to get more traction in the US, are planning to move or set up small teams there, but struggle to attract good talent, right?
I think from an engineering perspective, you don't need to hire in the US. It doesn't make sense to build an engineering team in the US. It's much more affordable to do it anywhere else in the world. So I wouldn't build an engineering team in the US if I could avoid it. But from a go-to-market perspective, if I'm targeting North America, it might make sense to hire some go-to-market people in the US that can address that market. I'm a strong believer in product-led growth, which means you are less dependent on salespeople, customer success, and so on, but still having some kind of presence in the US is great, like customer success or support that can be there to respond in real time to US customers makes a lot of sense. I think another reason why I wanted to maybe hire some US talent on the go-to-market side is they think bigger. I think that's a challenge. If we compare at least Europe and the US, I think we have the same kind of great skill at building products, but what they're better at in the US is thinking big about their products and also charge more. Typically, if you look at a comparative kind of pricing matrix between a US company and a European company, they will charge 3x more than the European company because they know they can charge that. And that's something I think many European companies can learn from, that they are undercharging for their products. And those things you might only learn if you bring in some US talent to your team.
I think that's a great observation. And I've spoken to a bunch of founders who've also spotted this trend. The confidence to know your market and what you can price your product is significantly higher in the US than it is in any part of the world.
Because if you ask European customers, they're going to say it's expensive, right? But reality is an American customer is not going to say that. They think that's just the price they're going to pay. So I think that's been one of the biggest lessons for us as we started Cobalt. We started initially charging 2K for a pen test and ended up charging 15K, right? Because that was the market price. We just didn't know that was the market price, right? I think that's a lesson you can learn by building the team, like a part of your go-to-market team in the US. And I do recommend focusing on US because it's such a, as I said, homogenous market. They all speak English. They have money to spend. It's just the best market in the world almost, from both ability to spend money and basically being very homogenous.
Yeah, that is spot on. You talked a little bit about product led growth, and you also have said in the past that most SaaS businesses should have some kind of PLG aspect to their business. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to go one way or the other, but more often than not, founders especially try to think either there is a PLG motion or a sales led motion. And do you think differently? Is one better than the other, or a mix of both works?
Yeah, I think it's a maturity thing, right? So I think we are now in a phase where the end users are more in power. So now more and more companies come PLG driven. Whereas when we started Cobalt 10 years ago, the market for buying SaaS solution was still a bit more immature. So you needed a bit more education, especially with a product like Cobalt. We were selling something that was brand new on the market, bug bounty program platforms, right? As we later pivoted into Pentest. It was brand new and we needed to really educate the market. And even though we actually started out as a very product-led platform with self-sign-up and all that, but we realized, okay, in order to really get into this market, we need to be more sales-led and educate the customers. So that's what we did. And I think a problem with that was we forgot completely about our product-led motion, right? So we turned that off, and then we became purely sales-led. The bad thing about that is you end up becoming more and more of a service company, right? Because you tend to think human first in everything you do, where you like, let's solve this by hiring more people to solve this sales challenge or customer success challenge, instead of thinking, how could we solve this in the product, right? Like, how could we make it easier for people? So I think a healthy mix is probably what most companies should strive for, but a good kind of rule of thumb is, given the current market maturity, is if you need to educate the market, a sales-led motion is maybe good. But if there's a lot of competition already in your market, if you don't need to do a lot of education, then a product-led motion is the superior motion in any way, because you can grow much faster at a lower cost.
Okay, that makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about your current company, UserFlow, as well. Your journey has been a little different. With Cobalt, you raised a fair amount of VC money. I believe with UserFlow, you are Bootstrap.
Yeah. So to give where we ended when I was telling the story, we started Cobalt in 2013. We stayed around in San Francisco, later expanded to Boston and Berlin. We raised the Series A, we raised the Series B. I actually want a short mention on those two rounds. We used an unfair advantage for our Series A and raised from a Danish fund. So that's something you can consider as well. As a company that kind of moves to Silicon Valley, you can still use your unfair advantage that you might have some connections in your home country that you could get easier investment from than American investors. But yeah, we did that. We raised capital. We built a company in 2020. We were around 200 employees in the company. We had pivoted, as I mentioned, from bug bounty programs to what we call pen test as a service, which was more like a structured pen testing. But the idea was still the same, a software-driven security platform. So in 2020, we were at that stage, very mature company. Everything was running very operationally. And that was probably the problem for me. It was too operational. It was too boring to some extent. It was more about leading other people, hiring people, managing people. And as a founder, at least me, and I know many other founders feel the same, we want to be close to the product. We want to be close to the customers. We want to build something, right? And that becomes increasingly hard in a 200 plus employee company. So for me, I started to think, okay, I want to do another startup instead of doing this. I felt like Cobalt was ready to move on without me. So I made a decision to basically leave Cobalt in 2020 and join my friend Sebastian to start UserFlow. I had met Sebastian actually in San Francisco. He's also Danish. but we met in San Francisco and became friends. He was doing another startup at that time, later worked at Google. And then he had started UserFlow, which basically is a no-code tool for building product onboarding and surveys and so on.
Yeah.
And he wanted me to join him. He's a very strong full stack engineer, and he wanted somebody to drive the go-to-market side, which I had a lot of experience in from Cobalt. So I made that hard decision to leave Cobalt and join UserFlow. And we think about it things a bit differently, maybe because it's my second time company, both for Sebastian and I, but we are fully bootstrapped. We think profit first in everything we do. We are only a team of 3, and we've been able to grow the revenue to 4.5 million ARR with product-led growth, basically. So very different company from Cobalt.
You mentioned you are a team of 3 at UserFlow.
Yep.
That is amazing. I wouldn't have ever thought that, because UserFlow is still fairly popular. I mean,
no, we have customers, and as I said, 4.5 million ARR. So it's been a very fun and different journey, but it shows the power of product-led growth, basically.
How do you manage expectations of 700 customers when you still have 3 people on the team? Then a lot of people who are listening to this are founders and might want to learn a thing or two from this journey, right? That you can still build a $5 million business or even more with a very small team. And in the past, we've heard of examples like WhatsApp. I'm not going to bring that up because the B2B SaaS, enterprise SaaS journey is a little bit different. What do you think enables you to run so lean, whereas others might at this point at least have 20 people, if not more, like on engineering, product, design, and so many other things?
Yeah. In short, the answer is product-led growth. But of course, it starts with product market fit, right? Everything else, you need product market fit. I think with UserFlow, what we did was we entered a very competitive market. So there was already, we knew we could get product market fit because other companies in that space already had product market fit. So we just needed to find out what was our unique differentiation. And we decided to focus on making it easier to build the content and provide a higher levels of sophistication. So those two things don't rule out each other. We actually been able to do both. So I think that was one thing we did. Like we didn't go to like with Cobalt, we entered a brand new kind of area, which is harder to build something in. But in a competitive space, it's more about how do you differentiate yourself from the competition, and it becomes easier to find that product market fit. So that's one thing we did. And then the rest of the motion has really been product-led growth. So the number one aspect of product-led growth is having a great product. Sebastian is an amazing engineer, has built a really easy to use builder with a high level of sophistication. So that's number one. Without a great product, you can't do product-led growth. And then the mindset is always, we should always fix it in the product first. The way we do it is like we build product onboarding, of course, using UserFlow with UserFlow. So self-service onboarding, self-service procurement, self-service, basically everything. And whenever we have a recurring support issue, we solve it in the product instead of solving it with people. So we don't go out and hire more support people. We basically just fix the issue and find a way to not have that question anymore. So the majority of things we fix by solving it in the product. And then everything we can't fix in the product, we try to automate using other tools like Zapier, integrations, etc. Automated emails. So it's always that mindset, fix it in the product first, then automate, and then only as a very last resort, use humans to do things, right?
That is amazing, Esben. I think kudos to all of you for scaling so well and effectively. And I think that's a learning and an inspiration for a lot of us who are listening to this as well, right? Now, tell me a little bit about all of this journey over the last 13, 14 years. As a founder myself, I've seen significantly difficult days, and that takes a toll on mental health. You moved out from Denmark, came to the Valley. I don't know how many people you knew back then, but you're leaving behind a lot of support that you get from your a known ecosystem and a community that you have. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How was it for you? Was it smooth? Did you have to struggle a lot in the early days? What did you do to rebuild that community around yourself in a new place?
Yeah, for me, it was I wouldn't say it was a fun adventure to go to another country and build a company there, right? Be in Silicon Valley, that was amazing. So that part was just fun and adventure. But from a challenge point of view, you can say, number one, we were four Danish guys who did Cobalt, and we didn't know anybody in Silicon Valley, right? So we
Mm.
had to prove ourselves in that community. And especially in the US, the security community is a very tight knit group of CISOs that
Yep.
all know each other and they use the tools that they know and so on. So we had a hard time getting into that market. One thing we did so we struggled for a long time. It was a lot of grind in the beginning, and we cracked the code when we hired Caroline Wong, who became a thought leader for Cobalt. She knew everybody in the industry, and suddenly people started listening to us. So
Mhm.
that's something you can consider if you're trying to penetrate a market, is find somebody who's already part of the community and use them as a way to get your message across. I think in the
Mm.
beginning we grinded way too much, and it was a lot easier to get customers after Caroline joined. So we could have avoided maybe some of that grind by having her earlier. But it's not necessarily that we could have gotten her earlier. So it's that kind of
Yeah.
balance, right? You never know. So I think that was one challenge. Then the second one we experienced with Cobalt was, and that's something many VC-backed companies will experience, is because they don't think profit first. They don't think about managing it's become different now with the
Yep.
current market conditions. But after our initial angel round, we were actually close to running out of money at Cobalt because we had spent all the money. And we had a team of 10 after our angel round, and we were close to, should we let everybody go and just be the founders again? We were at that stage, and we were struggling to find product market fit with that bug bounty model. And that's where, but tough
Mm.
times makes you stronger. So that's where we
Yep.
actually decided to pivot into pen testing. So we found our product market fit with pen testing then. And secondly, because of that change, we were able to raise another round from a small VC fund. So we survived that, but I think that's an area where many VC-backed companies will fail because they're so focused on just spending money, and they will run out of money, and then they will be in these kind of
Yep.
situations. Whereas with UserFlow, if you always think profit first, you're not dependent on outside capital. It's a lot easier to not be in those kind of situations where you have to run out of money or have to urgently find capital and these kind of things. Yeah, very different with UserFlow. But yeah, so those are some key struggles that we had with Cobalt. Was one, penetrating the market due to us being Danish; two, finding that product market fit. But I think every business struggle with that, right?
Yep. And you touched upon a very interesting thing, right? And I want to ask you something more about the way it's different to run a bootstrap company versus a VC backed company. I've also, in my experience, run one each of these kind. And when you have some VC capital, of course, you have a better way to hire people. You have more money in the bank, gives you a little bit of ease of mind, but there's also a lot more pressure to deliver value back to your shareholders, right? Whereas in the bootstrap model, in that sense, you have slightly more peace of mind, but you might struggle to attract good talent till you reach a point where you're well-known name. But even then, a lot of players or a lot of good talent today might want to ask you, like, how much money do you have in the bank? How much money have you raised? Do you think, in your experience, or in at least your personal experience, you are happier in the bootstrap journey than you were in your VC funded business?
100%. I'm much happier in this world where we have full control and we also slim. I like working in a smaller team, to be honest. I think it was
Yeah.
in Kobo, we had a lot of fun building out a team. We had a lot of fun parties and all this stuff. But from a business perspective, it's much more leaner and we can make decisions much faster in a smaller team. So I think both journeys were fun. I like the bootstrap journey better because I have more control in that. But I think with Cobalt, we didn't have a lot of choice. Back then, we were newbie entrepreneurs, right? We had never done a startup. So I think it was just a natural path. That's what you do. You raise capital. And also we didn't have a lot of money on the bank account. So it was a lot harder to bootstrap. It's a lot easier if you already have one, money on your bank account, and two, you have some kind of because now UserFlow is my second startup. I have a lot more to say. I'm the Caroline Wong of UserFlow, right? Like suddenly people listen
Yes,
to me because I have already done a startup. So
correct.
when you're doing your first startup, you don't necessarily have those things. And in those scenarios, it might make more sense to raise capital and get some outside assistance. But I think one thing we actually also did in Cobalt that I think many VC-backed companies forget about is, or early stage founders, they focus way too much on getting that initial funding, right? That's all they think about is we should go out and raise capital because that's what startups do. But reality is you should focus on getting to product market fit, getting your first customers, getting paying customers. That's the essence of building a company. It's like getting customers,
Yep.
right? And getting customers who pay for your product. It's not the essence of a company to go out and raise capital and get some
Yep.
kind of valuation that might be true or not. So I think I'm not against companies raising capital. I think they should, especially if you're a first time entrepreneur, it makes sense. But don't make that your primary goal. Your primary goal should always be deliver value to customers so they will pay for your product. And try to do that for as long as possible before you raise capital, because then you also get much better terms.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice. And on that note, we are getting close to the end of this episode. You've shared a lot of important as well as valuable nuggets of information. As we sign off, do you have some recommendations for, let's say, a favorite podcast or a newsletter or some people that our listeners should follow in order to start building on that same ideology where they're looking to come to the US, but they need some kickstart to start building that network and community? Are there any such people you would suggest they should meet with or
Oh,
listen to?
I don't listen to a lot of podcasts that are focused on exactly that, but definitely probably your podcast is great at sending that message. But yeah, I think, yeah, I haven't heard a lot of podcasts focused on that exact topic, but it's something people should really consider just jumping into it and getting out there. I have
Yep.
not regretted one day of me leaving Accenture and doing startups, and I think people should just do it. But from a general podcast perspective, listen a lot to Wes Bush. He has a whole product-led community where you can learn a lot about product-led growth. So that's definitely something I
Mhm.
recommend looking at. There's Kyle Poya from OpenView. OpenView, they are in a funny state right now. They might go down, I don't know. But he's doing a newsletter on product-led growth as well. That's great to follow. So those are two people I follow a lot when it comes to
Awesome.
product-led growth. And then I think my biggest idols is actually Jason Fried and DHH from 37 Signals, because I think what they do is exactly tell the story of what the modern founder should look like. Now we're in that stage where we don't need to think about VC capital all the time. We should think about building companies, true profitable companies. And they have been an advocate for that for the last 20 years or so.
Yep.
And now is the time to really listen to them. And they have so much great material on how you should think about building a business. So highly recommend, go to 37signals.com. They have a whole manifest of how they build businesses. That's amazing to read. And of course, I like DHH because he's Danish as well. So great guy. Yeah.
All right. Awesome, Esben. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I think it was an amazing conversation and a lot of insightful information shared there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy, challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.